So my name is Zuill. I've been programming software for about over 35 years. And when I first started working, I always programmed alone. Somewhere along the way, somewhere in the 90s, I learned about pair programming, and I really learned to enjoy it. And a little bit later, we stumbled upon this idea of mob programming, and I'm going to talk about that today with you. I am very honored to be here. I was invited to speak here, and I jumped at the opportunity. And it's truly makes me feel welcomed to be asked to speak about a topic like this. So how many of you know about mob programming before you saw it in the conference here? How many of you know about mob programming? So I'm going to give you a quick introduction. It's only maybe less than half of you really even know about it. I'm going to give a quick introduction to what mob programming is, and then I'll talk about why I think it's worth considering. Is this loud enough? Is this working okay? Okay, very good. I usually get too excited and I'll speak too fast. Some of you are listening to me on translation. If I go too fast, let me know. I'll slow down. I always share this first. I'm not here to tell you what to do or whether or not you should do it. All I'm here to do is share some things we've done and some of the things we've thought about in relation to the things we've done. I can't tell you what to do. Nobody can. You've got to figure that out for yourself. I'm going to do this quick introduction to mob programming. Essentially, mob programming is the idea that everybody working on the software, on the team, will work together at the same time on the same thing in the same place and at the same computer. In other words, we're going to have 5 or 6 people, maybe more, sitting at a single computer. We've gathered together all the knowledge and skills we need to do this work so we can work on it directly without waiting, without interference, without interruptions. So we want to make it as easy as possible to work as a team. We're going to have all the skills we need so we don't need to go off the team to ask questions of people. It looks like this. This is a typical team. This was our original team with a few other people back in California. And I think this picture was probably taken in 2012 or 2013. And there's 5 or 6 people there, including a tester, including a couple developers, a database expert, a product owner. Everybody that we need to do the work is all here together. It's not 5 people watching one person program. It's very different than that. It's 5 or 6 people, or however many people there are, programming together. We're working together on the same thing at the same time. We're not watching one person work and waiting for our turn. As a matter of fact, when our expertise is most needed, we step away from the keyboard. And I'll explain only a little bit about that today. We use this technique we call driver navigators. There are other techniques for working together, but essentially the person at the keyboard is driving, so to speak, and everyone else is navigating. They're helping guide that person. But you would have chaos if everybody just all talked at the same time. So we have a handful of little techniques that we use. I won't share those with you now, but maybe we can do a session later, maybe in the open space, or I can talk to you individually about how we actually go about doing this. And there are other talks you can see on the internet, on YouTube. You can find, some of the techniques that we use. Essentially, all those navigators are thinking about where we're going and helping guide the person at the keyboard whose main job is to just take those ideas and get them into the computer. We follow this one little guideline, and this is a guideline that worked very well for us, and I suggest it'd be a good one to try, but again, you would find your own maybe better guidelines. But for an idea to go from someone's head into the computer, it has to go through someone else's hands. And this requires that we become pretty good at communicating with each other. And that's not necessarily easy to do. We need to practice and learn how to do it. Most of you here who are working in software development have been working alone most of your career. You might do some pair programming. Some people do pair programming. Not a lot. I think percentage-wise, well, why don't we ask here, how many of you typically work programming, doing pair programming? Show of hands. All right. Hopefully it's an even number, but anyways. That was meant to be a little humorous. Okay, this seems crazy. How can we work with all these people at the same computer? It seems preposterous. And it doesn't seem like it could work. And I wouldn't think it would work. If somebody just came up and told me about it, I would think, boy, how can that possibly work? And yet we found it to be very effective for us. What we found was that once we started sharing it with other people, they started doing it too and finding good results. So this picture is at Hunter Industries, where we originated this idea, or at least we discovered it for ourselves. Other people may have been doing it. But once we originated it, we kept doing it, and it grew. And in the company, there are now 8 or 10 teams working this way. And you can see in this picture, there's 6 teams in that area alone. But let's look at some other places around the world. Here's Alaska. Here's in the United Kingdom. Here's GDK in London. This is Zipcar in Boston. These places, some of them, here's TUI in Stockholm. They have 8 or 10 teams working this way there. Same at Unruly in London. This is, they're teaching agile concepts using mob programming at Harvard. This is a group in San Diego called Zuill. They have about 10 teams working this way. There's another one of their teams. And they were proud to show me this is all they need to manage 10 teams. Actually, at the time they showed this to me, there were 6 teams. Each one of those lanes represents a team and the work that they're doing. And this is all the CTO of the company needed to manage 6 teams. And he was very, very happy to see this, to how easy it made their work. Here's a group in South Africa. I noticed this, I don't know how is it in Brazil. I noticed north of the equator, everybody faces in this direction. You see that? And south of the equator, everyone faces in that direction. There must be some science to it. This may not be mob programming. This picture was taken when I was about 7 years old. But this looks like mob programming, all the brilliant minds working together on the same thing at the same time. That happens to be Grace Hopper, and I would imagine she would understand this, that we collaborate, and that's where the good things come from. Here's a group in Sweden at a place called Meltwater. Here's a group in Germany, a group in Spain. This another group in Sweden. They wrote an article about it and shared these photos that show how they work together as a team. Notice the whiteboards. Notice the artifacts that they have there for teamwork. Here's a group in Japan. I think that's a really interesting picture, and another group in Japan. And lastly, here's a picture of some people working remotely doing this. Now, I've done this several times in the last 5 years, where we worked for months at different places where we are working remotely as a team, all at the same time, at the same computer conceptually. This is not programming, this is NASA mission control, but it's the same basic idea. All the brilliant minds working on the same thing at the same time in the same space. I showed this picture to somebody who works in this NASA mission control, and they explained to me that they have gathered everyone they need, plus redundancy, because this is a very important mission. There will be 2 people with the knowledge of any specific knowledge area, all there at the same time. Now, they have to rotate those people through, and they have a mechanism for doing that, but this is the basic same idea, and this sort of proves the idea to me that this is a useful thing. Why would we work this way? I'm not going to go through this note by note here, but we found there were many reasons it was effective for us. And yet, almost every time I give this talk, I get this question, a talk like this anyways. How can you be productive with 5 people at one computer? Now, at first, I didn't know. I would just say, I don't know, does that matter? Because I didn't know how to answer it. But that question's been very persistent. Every time I would give the talk, somebody would ask, how can this be effective or be productive? So this is the thing. We were paying attention, and here is what we noticed. When we worked alone, we would get a certain amount of work done, and when we added up that work, we would get, that was the work for that period, whatever it happened to be. And when we worked together, we got a lot more done. Now, getting a lot done isn't necessarily a good goal to have, but that's just one of the things we noticed. How can we be productive with 5 or 6 people at one computer? Well, let's look at this a little bit differently. It wasn't just that we were getting more stuff done. That's just one aspect of it. It was the more meaningful stuff. As a team, we were able to better decide what was good to work on. Have I been going too fast? Not bad. Okay. Thank you. Boy, I can get faster and faster and faster. I'll try to keep it slow. It was better done. It was more complete. It was cleaner. The things we worked on were better designed, better architected. Everything we were getting out of this was better, and it was also higher quality from the user's point of view. All of these things we were getting. Along with that, we were also enjoying our day. It was less stressful and more fun. So all of this is what we noticed. So what do we do here? I thought at first I could answer the question by saying this is about systems thinking. With a system, it's not about the adding up of the results of the individuals. It's about the product of the interactions. And this is a very much an agile thought. In agile, we talk about individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So we felt we had found a way of interacting that was more like a more effective way than we normally would have when we separated everybody. But that still didn't satisfy people, so I kept searching. I want a better question. I'm going to talk about that. This is a question they want to ask, and this is what my father used to say. That's a picture of my father. That was before I met him, but this is what he would say to me. He was an engineer. He was an engineer in the phone company. He would say, a good question isn't for answers, it's for finding a better question. And a good question should lead to a better question. So I wanted a better question. I actually did talk to my dad about this when he was still alive, and he helped me think through some of these things. So I don't like that word productive. I want to share a little bit about productivity. There are three words we commonly use in English: efficiency, productivity, and effectiveness. And those are all kind of related to each other. I want to talk about that a little bit, though. Here's the thing. Efficiency is sort of about utilization, that we're getting the best, or I should say the highest use maybe, out of the things that we're doing. So we're getting a better utilization of our people as one way. But productivity is about getting things done. We can measure efficiency by just measuring, is everybody busy? And we could measure productivity by, are we getting things done? But I want effectiveness, and effectiveness is about working on the right things and getting them done. So you can see there's three ways to think about this, and I really want to move to the effectiveness. Essentially, efficiency can lead to busy work. We can be very busy and not be getting anything done. Everybody's really busy, but at the end of the sprint, nothing's been accomplished. We can get productivity where we've actually gotten something done at the end of our sprint or our iteration or whatever, but nobody wants those things. They're not the good things that people wanted. I want the effectiveness. Let's work on the right things. So I want to change the question. If the question is, how can we be productive? I want a slightly better question. This isn't as far as I need to go, but it's a beginning. I want to ask the question, how can we be effective with 5 people at one computer or more? Okay? So I still wanted the better question, and from my dad's point of view, my father, who was a very wise man, would have said several things. And one thing he would ask of me is to understand the point of view of the person asking the question. So point of view is very important. The point of view of the person asking the question is that they think we can separate the workers, have them get their work done, and when we add it up, we're going to get more done. Now, there's a lot of reasons they believe that. We don't have time to cover all of that, but it kind of comes down to this. I don't want to pay 5 people to work on the one person's work. I want to pay 5 people to work on 5 people's work. I'm not sure that's a valid way to view it, but this is a starting point. If you understand the point of the view of the question, then my father would say, you need to flip it over. So you now understand their point of view, and you have to get in the skin of the person who sees it from the opposite point of view and ask the opposite question. This gives you 2 questions, and we'll see how we use that in a moment. Basically, what's the reverse? And if we had time, I'd ask for you to join me to try and think about that, but I'm just going to give you what I came up with. This was the question from the opposite point of view. How can we be effective if we separate the people that should be working together? Now we have two questions. What usually happens when we separate people is we divide them by where they're sitting, by what they're working on, by who they're working for. They're in different departments. When we make that kind of a separation, are we potentially destroying effectiveness? But now we can ask this question. Between the two, which ones, well, I'll show you the question I came up with. What are the things that destroy effectiveness? We can look at both ways of working, practice with them, study them, try them out, experiment with them, and then ask our question, which one has problems and which one doesn't? And this is what I do when I do a workshop on this. I do this as an exercise, and I ask everybody to write down on Post-it notes, what are the things that destroy effectiveness? And typically, this is a 3-minute exercise. I did a 3-minute exercise with 20 people, and we came up with 51 things that destroy effectiveness. I'm going to give a few examples here. External dependencies. We're dependent on somebody outside of our team. We're missing resources. We don't have all the people we need. A couple of these I really like. Bugs. Well, bugs always destroy effectiveness, right? I think they do. Too much noise in the workplace. And look at the one right under it. Too quiet. Two different points of view on that one, right? Needless meetings. And I would venture to say any meeting destroys effectiveness. Now let's look at a few more. An upsetting work environment. People are mad at each other or not getting along well. How about analysis paralysis? We're talking about what should we do rather than doing it. A couple more. Personality clashes. We're not getting along. And so on. So here's the thing. When we started doing mob programming, we didn't set out to solve any of these problems. We didn't know that these problems would go away. We were turning up the good on working well together. That's all we were doing. We didn't set out to solve any of these problems. But here's what we noticed. When we started working this way, a lot of those problems faded away or disappeared for us. I made that as an animation. You probably didn't catch it because I'm going too fast. It faded away when we started working as a team. I know it's pretty good. Okay. So I'm going to share with you one problem that I believe is a fundamentally huge problem. This one has been bothering me for about almost 20 years when I first noticed it and wrote it down. I was working at a place and I noticed this problem. It was part of a set of communication problems, and we were studying the communication problems within the company I was working at. I was part of a small team, and we knew we had communication problems, and we started investigating them. And this turned out to be probably the biggest one, and I called it the question queue time. A queue is like a line. You're waiting for something. Okay? So the question queue time is the amount of time that we must wait to get an answer to a question that is blocking us. We can't work any further on this thing until we get that answer. That's the question queue time, is the amount of time we must wait to get that answer. The waiting is waste. It brings no value to us. It brings no value to our customers. We need to get the answer, but the waiting is waste. So we can use a value stream map to measure this. A value stream map, if you don't use one, basically is a way of measuring any activity in a process to determine, is this thing adding value or not? Now, the way that I'm drawing it here, this value stream map, the green line or the top line indicates when we're getting work done. Things are good. And the red line represents things aren't so good. We're waiting to get an answer to a question that is blocking us. And whenever we go into that mode where we're waiting, we can't be working on the thing any longer until we get the answer, and then we can work again. It's pretty straightforward. I'm going to make a simple example so that we can use it to make a judgment about how much time we're losing, theoretically. So what if we're getting, and for every hour we work, we are getting one question that's blocking us. And then we need to stop work on this till we get the answer. So if it takes us 0 time, every time we get a question, the answer is given to us immediately, then our value stream map would look like this. We're always getting value, and that's a good thing. What if it was 2 minutes to get the answer, or 10 minutes to get the answer? What if it took an hour to get the answer? What if it took a day to get the answer? Now, I usually ask audiences, I'll ask, do you typically get an answer to a question that's blocking you in 2 minutes? Show of hands. You get the answer in 2 minutes. Very rare, almost nobody. What about 10 minutes? You got a question, you're blocked? 10 minutes. 10 minutes, a few. What about an hour? Is that typical? It takes at least an hour. What about a day? Okay, so I haven't seen enough hands to be everybody. So what I usually find, sometimes I take a poll on this, what I find is it takes usually between 2 hours and 2 days. Can we agree that's sort of typical? You got the question, you send an email out, the person you sent the email responds saying, hey, I don't know about this, try asking Mary. So you send an email to Mary, Mary doesn't get back to you till the next day, and then the email comes back, she says, I'm sorry, but I was in meetings all day and I couldn't respond. These are the things that happen. Okay, so how do we typically deal with this? Let's say we're getting a question every hour, and it takes us an hour to get an answer. Somebody in the audience tell me, how do we normally deal with this? Shout it out. Multitask, take on another task. Okay, I heard that I think twice there. We take on more work. We increase inventory so we can stay busy. And remember, I'm not too interested in efficiency, which is about busyness. And actually, we've introduced inventory, which inventory is anything we've worked on that isn't yet delivered to the customer and delivering value. Guess what? Inventory itself is a waste. So if queuing or waiting is a waste, can we solve a waste by introducing a second waste? We are just doubling down on waste. I hope you can see that. This is not a good thing, but it can look like this. If we made it ideal, it would look like this. Where we look now like we're always busy and we have no problems because the waiting is now hidden. We've hidden the problem, and that's not good. Essentially, we've dealt with the symptom. The symptom is we're not busy enough, but we didn't deal with the problem. We're not getting our answers in a timely fashion, immediately. This is the question queue time. So, let's go on. How did we solve for it? It's a trick question. We didn't solve for it. It solved itself. This faded away for our team. On the team, we were never being blocked by questions that we couldn't get an answer for because everybody was there to answer the questions we would have, except in one case, and that would be our product owners. Our product owners weren't really on our team. They were outside the team. And we would start seeing right away that by lowering the water on the problems we have, which is a lean concept, we got rid of a lot of the waiting, and that exposed the really serious waiting. And the really serious waiting was coming from the product owners. And once we noticed that, we started talking to some product owners, and some of them offered to work more closely with us because they wanted to get their work done. And one of them, this particular fellow, Bruce, he said, I'll make sure and get back to you within 2 minutes whenever you have a question. That was better than waiting an hour or a day. And that's really sped us up. So we started realizing what we were getting is this concept of a one-piece flow. In lean manufacturing, one-piece flow means a piece goes from start to finish with as little inventory and as little waiting as possible. It goes from beginning to end. That's what we were trying to get. And that told us what we were really after. Flow. We were trying, now how am I going to answer the question, how can we be effective with 5 people at one computer? And I think this was the path we needed to go down, is flow. And so I'm going to show you that again because it's really important. See how important that is? One more time, because that's really important. You can see how it fills my mind. So as we started studying flow, unfortunately, I realized there are many ways the word is used. And it started troubling me because we have at least 2 kinds that were interesting to me, psychological flow and lean flow. And as I studied psychological flow, I read a great deal of this person's work. He actually has written 4 or 5 books, first in the 70s. He did a lot of studies on psychological flow. Some of you may have read some of his books. I'm sure you all understand the ideas. I'm going to read this. It's a highly effective mental state of a person completely immersed in an activity. This is what flow is. And you can have flow in very creative things, but in other things in your life as well. Flow is a good thing to have, and it sometimes leads to highly productive work. And a lot of programmers believe they need to be in flow to be able to work. Now, I think there's some reasons we want to investigate that a little further. I won't go too much into it now. But one of the things that I see as a problem with this psychological flow is that it makes us feel really effective. But I'm not sure we're always really effective. It's good to have that feeling, but it could be a trick we play on ourselves in some cases, not always. We think of that sometimes as being in the zone. Programmers talk about being in the zone, and you probably have all experienced this, even those of you who don't actually write code for a living, but do other things. We see this with musicians, with doctors. We see this with artists. We see this with all sorts of creative types and people who have to innovate and things like that. But it can go for any kind of work. So then I thought, I was worried, maybe working as a team is destroying our ability to have this psychological flow. And that's something I wanted to know more about. But remember, I'm always looking for a better question. So the first question wasn't the right question for me. I asked this question: can we get some sort of a team flow? And if we can, that's really cool. So I started looking for research on this, and I actually couldn't find any. So I started doing my own research. Now, I'm not a researcher. I don't gather data and publish papers about it. I'm not an academic. I'm not a scientist. I'm just somebody who works with, does programming with the teams I work with. But I started collecting stories about people working as a team that showed something to me of the concept of flow. And I found pictures like this. Here's a group of people focused on a problem all together. Here's a group of teenagers learning to play music in their garage. That's not really, but anyways. Here's a group. Anybody recognize where this is from? So this is Xerox PARC. These people, I think, could be in a kind of flow where they're creating ideas about computers that we all now carry with us and use every day, many, many years ago. Here's another group that might be working in flow. They're all focused on the same thing at the same time in the same space. They're not necessarily working with a computer, but this is a holistic approach to the work they're doing, and everyone there has to be focused on that work. Now, they have to be ultimately focused here, way more than we really need to be in doing software development as a team. Then I started finding papers people had written. This was a very good one. I read this one cover to cover, and it really explained a lot of the things. What I got out of it was that we can have a kind of team flow. He talks about collective ambition, common goal, aligned personal goals, high skill integration, and so on and so on. Now, that's a paper you can find, I think, online for free. Some of these things are what you get from working as a team, and some of these things are what you need to bring to working as a team to be able to get this flow. Now, that's a powerful thing, and I started observing we were getting this sort of a flow. So we've talked a little bit about individual flow, which I started realizing we weren't necessarily losing when we also had the team flow. Because one of our team guidelines or principles was you have to maintain your own personal ability to think. So you keep with yourself your own control. If you feel you want to go off and think alone, you go off and think alone. You were never required to sit with the team, but you were always, invited to be with the team. And most of the team members at Hunter Industries, where we first started doing this, we worked 8 hours a day, every day as a team. And we would spend that time together. But if you wanted to go be alone, take a walk, sit alone, think, whatever you wanted to do, you could go do that. So I think we could find a way to get the individual flow as well as the team flow. And this is all good, but now I want to talk about the concept of lean flow. So lean flow is kind of like this. We have seen this in manufacturing for many years now, because the famous place is Toyota that's been written about that does this, but many firms do lean manufacturing. The basic idea is we're going to have the complete production of a piece. It's going to go from the very start to the very end as directly as possible, with as little waiting and inventory as possible. If we can accomplish this in manufacturing, we've gotten rid of the major wastes. Now, there are many others. They described 7 or 8 of them, but getting rid of the 2 major ones makes a big difference, and this can help do that. So can we get flow with software development? And I believe that we can. That's what we were observing. We were trying to get a one-piece flow, and then we found research on that. And this is a book I can recommend. This book covers quite a few topics. One of them is queuing. And queuing I found to be a very important problem in software development. And Reinertsen in this book doesn't necessarily just talk about software development. It's about product development, but it's essentially the same field. So the principle of queuing waste says this: queuing is the root cause of the majority of waste in product development. If that's true, we should be paying a lot of attention to that. Why do we have it? How do we get rid of it? What can we do about it? Now remember, we didn't set out to solve the queuing problem. We set out to work well together as a team. That's all. That was very powerful for us. It actually ended up almost the very first day changing how we worked. That very first day we started doing mob programming was purely an accident. I have a whole nother talk about that. But after that day, we just kept working that way, and we haven't stopped since. That was 8 years ago. So, queues create some problems. Longer cycle time. Cycle time is the amount of time from when we start working on something till we finish it. With a typical team where we split the work up between people, it might take a week or 2 to finish a story if you work on stories. What we found is we were getting stories done in a day and less, usually in a few hours. Anything that we would have called a story that we would have worked on previously that would have taken us a week or 2 was now taking us 2 or 3 hours. We saw that almost immediately. That was powerful to us. You get an increased risk with queues because you're postponing getting the answers to your questions. You're pushing the risk forward. There's a lot of other things, more variability. We won't discuss these in detail. We only have so much time. Although I haven't seen anybody telling me yet that I'm running out of time, so we're probably doing pretty good. So if I slow down now, at least I can get it done at the correct finish time. So I will start speaking slower. I don't still see anybody telling me how much time I have left. Have I been going too fast? 25 more minutes? I am really going to have to slow down. $15 minutes. I gotta do a song and then a dance. So let's talk about flow with software development. This is how I define it. With flow in software development, I want to take an idea from beginning to end as directly as possible. That means from idea to working delivered software somebody is using. They talk in Scrum and some other things about potentially useful. That's like your friend telling you, don't worry, the check is in the mail. Do you remember that? Check is in the mail. It meant I've already sent the check off. It's just stuck in the mail somewhere. There's no value to you actually get the check, take it to the bank, cash it, and you can use the money. Same basic idea. We want to go directly without the queuing, without the inventory. We work on one thing at a time with a mob programming team. Now, we will get blocked occasionally, and we get back in the queue when that happens, but our goal is to not have that. We don't want the distractions. We don't want the interruptions, and we don't want the multitasking. None of those are good things. When the team is focused on something and they can get it done from beginning to end in a few hours, the feeling of success and the feeling of progress lives with you all day long. You're never depressed that how are we going to get these things done? We're getting them done. It's a better way to live. It's an uplifting way to work. So I want as many of these attempts to deliver value as possible, and we always do them one at a time. But I'm going to tell you a kind of a secret now. If you go to an Agile talk and they don't have a circle in it somewhere, it's not an Agile talk. So I put a circle in so you knew this was Agile. Okay? So where in this cycle can we learn things? Where do we learn things in this cycle? Somebody tell me. Where do you learn in this cycle? Everywhere. Everywhere. Once you share an idea, you start learning. When somebody else reflects it back to you, it helps you think. And the whole team is doing this. After a little bit of time, you've got it into the point where you can turn it into a story and start writing code. Both of those, when we start trying to describe, well, what do we really think this thing should be, we're learning. When we start writing code, we're learning. At any point we might say, stop. What we just learned, we need to go back to the drawing board and rethink this thing. I want that in tiny cycles, not the end of 2 weeks, not the end of a week. Let's get that in real time. What we found when we achieved flow was we were working on the right things, which meant pretty much getting the work done and the exploration and discovery and experimentation that was needed to do that, because software development is a creative thing. It's not just here's some requirements, just go do them. We have to actually spend time exploring them. And we found that we weren't doing any of the bad things, or many of the bad things. They were fading away. We didn't need meetings anymore. We didn't find we needed to talk about what we should do. We would express a few ideas and try them. And if we found we made progress, we'd continue down that path. If we didn't, we'd talk about it a little more. We always were talking just a little bit. I want this, I would prefer that we get to action, that we actually try the things we're talking about. So a lot of these things faded away. Failure demand. Failure demand is the things we need to fix that we put into the code that needed fixing. And those are usually called bugs. We were getting very few bugs. In the 3 years I worked at Hunter, after we started working this way, in 3.5 years, we only had 3 bugs get reported into our bug tracking system, and we worked on something over 40 projects during that time. We stopped calling the work we did projects. We started calling them products or applications. We didn't call them projects. We weren't any longer doing them as projects. And there's a whole movement now about that, kind of a no projects idea that comes from Alan Kelly back in the UK. It's worth looking into, and so on. So when we're doing mob programming, what are we optimizing for? This is a question that I think you're ready to answer now, but I'll tell you the answer. We're optimizing for the flow of the work. Anything that gets in the way of the flow, we want to handle that. We're not trying to optimize the output of the individual, which is what we do when we separate people. That doesn't matter to us anymore. It's not important that each individual is doing the most that they can do. We're not trying to get the most out of each person. We're trying to get the best of each person into everything we do. When I worked alone, when I was a solo programmer, the very best of me and the very worst of me got into everything I did. Do you see what I'm talking about? When I worked with a pair and started pair programming, the best of me and the best of my pair got into everything we did. And the worst of neither of us got into anything we did. Because when we get to the worst parts, we'd ask ourselves about it. What can we do better? How can we change this? What do we need to learn? It was easier to get rid of the bad stuff. And there was, by default, more good stuff. So this is what happens when we mob programming. The best of everybody gets into everything we do, and the worst of nobody ends up in our code. We've got everybody there. Let's say my specialty was database stuff and maybe some middleware, but I didn't know a lot about front end. But if I was working on those things alone, the front end would be terrible, and the database stuff would be good. Now we've got a database expert, and a front end expert, and a middleware expert, and a product expert, and a tester. I love having a tester on the team. Are there testers here today? Anybody here identifies as being a tester? 2 testers with 600 developers. That's the normal mix. Yikes. I love having a tester on the team because the tester's mind is different than the developer's mind. They're always looking for edge cases. They're always looking for things that are a little out of the normal, and we want all of that there. Let's go on. I believe I can answer that original question. How can we be effective with 5 people at one computer? Instead of adding up the 5 separated people's work, how can we do that? And this is what I believe. We're getting flow plus flow. We're getting that team flow I talked about, but we're also getting the lean flow. We're getting the psychological flow, so we really want to expand that a little bit. We're getting the team flow, and we're getting the individual psychological flow, and we're getting the lean flow. 3 kinds of flow we can get. And somebody pointed out to me that this is actually flow plus plus. So I said, I'll use that. I like that. Flow plus plus. Maybe I need to get a little trademark on that. We're getting a lot of kinds of flow when we work this way. And I think that's a benefit. The team flow, because we're working well together. And I want to make it clear, mob programming isn't necessarily easy to do. You have to learn how to get along with other people. And humans have trouble with that, it seems, sometimes. We need to learn to get along well, to be able to work together well. But we're getting the individual flow because we're in control of our own brain, and we get to say, hey, I need to rest for a while, or I need to go relax alone, or I want to think about this and work out some things on my own, and you're allowed to do that. There's nothing that says you have to work this way all the time. This is just the way that, this is one option. You can work as pairs, you can work as an individual, you can work as a team. When we work as a team, we have that as just another option. But we're also getting the lean flow because we've eliminated the queues, we've eliminated the inventory. We're getting something closer to a lean flow. So I know we still have too much time left, but I'm on my last slide. So we're okay? So I'm going to share this little thing with you. This is a saying that I was given, it was given to me by a friend of mine, sort of a teacher or a mentor, when I was about 25 years old, and I've used it ever since. The object isn't to create art, it's to be in that wonderful state which makes art inevitable. The good things are going to happen when we create an environment where good things are allowed to happen. And they're just not going to happen if we make our environment where it's difficult. So this is sort of maybe this was the fundamental idea that I brought to our team at Hunter when I first wanted to help this team become better. We didn't know mob programming was going to emerge out of working this way. But we were attempting to create an environment where great things can happen, and I think the world is looking on something like mob programming. We might not be considering it a great thing, but it's useful to a lot of people, and I hope it's useful to you if you give it a try. And I'd love to hear from you if you do give it a try. So I think that we're to this slide and to the 2 of 4 words that I know. Muito obrigado. Thank you. I can do that. Do we have time? So I can take a question or 2. How do we do that? Here's people with a microphone. He will get his steps for the day by running to you. So whoever's got a question, we'll make sure it's someone over here next time, so he has to run all the way across the room. So let's see if I can answer a question.
Hi, Odi. Would it be interesting to hear some stories about when mob programming did not work really well, or
when it doesn't work well?
Yeah.
So I'll share a couple ideas. So first of all, we thought that mob programming was for the really big, important things. So when we first started doing it, we all gathered together to look at some code someone was having trouble with. They weren't sure what to do with that. They were thinking they needed more people to help them. And instead of just looking at it, we started working on it together. And then we go, boy, that went well. We got a lot done. We learned a lot. It was a lot of fun. And it was very high quality. That was just a few hours. We said, let's do more of this. So the rest of the day, we continued to do that. So at first, we thought it was for these big, hard problems. But then we started noticing that it works well on the little problems, too. If we just stay together, a team, it flows through. We take each thing that comes to us easy or hard. but there are things that can get in our way. And one thing is, if one person takes the keyboard and everybody else just watches them type, that's not really going to work. It has to be full communication. And often when we're pair programming, you'll notice somebody's typing away and somebody's watching. They go, wait, I don't see how that's going to work. And the person typing away goes, oh, don't interrupt. You'll see in a minute. We're not really communicating our ideas. Another thing is we take advantage of this idea of navigators. But if there's somebody on the team that's sort of pushy and they navigate all the time, it's almost the same thing. We need to take advantage of all the brains we've gathered together. So there's two ways that I've seen it not working. It's got to be voluntary. I think we need to bring the people who want to work this way together. So if we force people to work this way, I don't think that's going to work well. So there's a few ideas. Do we have another question? I hope that answered that for you. Another one back there. Yes.
Yes, please. Usually we don't have the PO available all the time,
Yes.
so it's very hard to use this approach. This mob programming is still working if we don't have the PO available all the time. I'm not seeing this working, but...
Yeah, so I would say this. So the question sort of is, if we can't have the PO available all the time, can this still work? There are many people working in that situation with mob programming. They still have the question queue time, so we don't get the full benefit of the flow, but it's only for that one aspect, the product owner. We can get a good result from this, but I would say it's revealing a problem we need to solve. If we don't solve the problem of the product owner being available or knowledgeable enough, sometimes you'll see a product owner go, gee, I don't know how to answer that, I'll get back to you. Well, is that a product owner or is that a go-between or what is that? If they're not fully immersed in the work, they should be. They need to be a full-fledged member of the team. And if they can't be available every minute, they should be available very, very frequently. So that's just a problem to solve. I would say, let's solve that problem. We want to get the software done quickly. There you go. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Do you mind if I do another question? Usually we have some people with different kind of personality, and sometimes those people doesn't have the proper approach to you work
Sure.
in this kind of way. Do you have any suggestion for those people?
Well, we need to practice working together. We need to learn to listen to each other. We need to learn to be respectful. We need to learn to be considerate. What we're trying to do when we're working this way is use everybody's ideas. So we need to learn how to let other people try their ideas. It takes practice. So if they don't get along right now, if they're not easily working this way, they need to practice doing that. So just like with anything, if you want to play on a basketball team or play in a orchestra, you're going to practice the skills needed, not just individually, but as a team. So we need to practice. We need to get good at those skills, and not everybody can get good at those skills. Could you imagine? I mean, there's so many individuals, but you might find a team for each individual. Maybe they belong on a different team. No. Another question. Last question.
Thank you for your presentation. And I work in a team that have 3 developers, and sometimes you bother in this Slack message, and it's turned a long time into distractions. Oh, I need to expose my API for other teams, consulting our team through integrations, and I saw many benefits on the team focus, but could I prevent too many distractions in Slack? And it's a trade-off. If you get queues in the other side or improve my team flow.
You're just pointing out a problem we need to solve, right? It's like, why do we allow for all these distractions? I worked with a team once where the vice president in the company, who was in charge of sales and things, would come in and take somebody off the team to go do something he needed to get done. And so I made it my job to block that and not let it happen, because the team couldn't get their work done. Is that sort of what you're addressing, is too many other dependencies and people getting asked to do other things all the time? Is that sort of what you're talking about? Yeah. So there's, again, it's just revealing a problem we need to solve. We shouldn't allow that to happen. Maybe our company is trying to do too much with too little. I don't have an easy answer, but if we really believe in flow and in the ideas of lean, we need to find a way to solve those problems. Now, usually if we turn up the good on the things that are going well and don't try to solve those problems, they'll fade away for us. That's what I have found. That's what I like to do. But yeah, sometimes we have to face it off and say, hey, we're destroying this team's effectiveness by expecting them to be able to answer anybody's question at any time. We need to figure these things out. I don't have an easy solution for that. Well, thank you again. Muito obrigado.